So in my opinion, investing in rental properties is one of the simplest and most predictable ways that an average person like you or I can achieve a $1 million net worth. Like, you can literally look at the real estate somebody owns and pretty accurately predict what their net worth is going to be in 10, 20, or 30 years from now. And that is why I recommend to so many of my clients to get into real estate investing. And after working with many new investors and helping them buy their first rental properties, and for me owning my own rental properties as well, I keep seeing the same mistakes pop up over and over again. So today I wanted to run through what I think are the 5 biggest mistakes that new investors make when buying their first few rental properties. So the first mistake I see new investors making is that they get a little too ambitious and they want to buy as many units as they possibly can. They're really focused on that unit count. So often I have people tell me that they want to buy a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex for their very first rental property, and I usually try to discourage them from doing that. And the reason for that is that one of the biggest pitfalls in owning rental properties is going to be the quality of your tenant. You can do everything right when buying and renovating your first rental property, but if you get a bad tenant in there, it can become a complete nightmare and undo all the positive steps that you took. And in my personal opinion, when you invest in more units, you're increasing the chances of you getting a lousy tenant in there. So let me give you an example. So here in Maryland, you could probably buy a single family townhouse for about $300,000, and you'd probably get about $1,900 a month in rent for that one unit. Or you could buy a triplex here and maybe get $700 a month for each of those 3 units for a total of $2,100 a month. And if this was your first rental property, I'd tell you you probably want to go with the 1 unit home rather than the 3 unit home. And the reason is the quality of tenants that those price ranges are going to attract. So you have to think about what is the quality of the tenant that you're going to attract with a $700 a month unit. But on the flip side, if you bought the 1 unit townhouse and were getting $1,900 a month, what kind of tenant do you think that you'd attract to that type of rental property? You may get a married couple in their 40s with reliable jobs and who wanted that rental property to get their children in that specific school zone. So in my personal opinion, I think having that one high quality tenant is going to be a lot less stress, a lot less time consuming for you rather than having 3 lower quality tenants. You also have to look at the maintenance costs as well. With a 3 unit home, now you have 3 times as many stoves and refrigerators and sinks and possibly AC units that you have to maintain. So despite the 3 unit rental property possibly giving you more cash flow every month, in my opinion, I think that the 1 unit rental property is probably going to give you a lot less headaches and it'll be a lot less time consuming and probably a lot less risk as well. So the next mistake I see investors making is not putting enough of a down payment when they buy their first rental property. So there are some techniques that you can use to buy your first rental property with 100% financing. And one of my favorite ones is to buy a home as your primary residence first, fix it up, then move out and turn that into a rental property. And that's actually how I acquired my first rental property, and I bought it using the VA loan, so I was able to buy it with 0% down. You can also use this technique with the USDA Rural Development Loan, which is also 0% down, or even an FHA loan, which only requires 3% down, as long as the home is your primary residence at the time of purchase. But the challenge of buying a home this way is that it's hard for the numbers to add up for you to be cash flow positive. I often have clients who buy a home as their primary residence, and then they come to me saying that they want to rent it, and they're surprised when the rent that they can get for the home is almost what their mortgage payment is. And I have to explain to them that the house is not cash flow positive because they put 0% down or almost nothing down. The amount of cash flow that you receive from a rental property is largely influenced by how much of a down payment you make on that rental property. And if you try to buy your first rental property by putting as little of a down payment as you can, you're gonna have a hard time finding a deal where the numbers add up and that you're cash flow positive. So I just recommend that you play around with the numbers a bit to figure out how much of a down payment you wanna make. And if your goal is to only ever own 1 or 2 rental properties, then I wouldn't be afraid of putting down a larger down payment to increase your monthly cash flow. So the next mistake is using fuzzy math and not really calculating all of your expenses before you buy your first rental property. I know a lot of people who own rental properties and they'll tell me that their cash cash flow positive and that they make a profit every month. But when you look at the numbers, they really don't. So when you're calculating your expenses for a rental property, most people know how to figure out what their mortgage payment's gonna be. That's gonna be your principal, your interest, your property taxes, and the insurance on that property. But there's a few other rental expenses that people don't really think about at first. And the first one's gonna be property management. Property managers typically charge 10% of the monthly rent. So if you're charging $1,900 a month in rent, a property manager is going to charge you $190 a month. The next expense people don't factor in is going to be vacancy rate. And vacancy rate is to compensate you for the time periods that you don't have a tenant in your home. So let's say on average you sign a 2-year lease and then your home is vacant for, let's say, 2 months before you get a new tenant in there. You have to pay your mortgage payment for those 2 months. So what you want to do is factor in that expense with every single monthly payment that you receive. So typically you want to factor in 3 to 10% of your monthly rental income is going to go towards vacancy expenses eventually. And I typically like to go with 8%. So 8% is equivalent to the home being vacant for 1 month out of every 12 months. So that's kind of worst case scenario, that every tenant that you have, they only have a 1-year lease, they don't renew it, and it takes you 1 month to find a new tenant. That means that about 8% of your monthly income is going to go towards covering the mortgage period during that vacancy period. You also want to add in your annual repair costs into your monthly expenses as well. And this is actually dependent on the quality of your home and how old your home is. If it's a brand new home, you probably don't need to factor in all that much for repair costs. But if you buy an old home from the 1950s, your repair costs on that property are going to be a lot higher. So generally people factor in 5 to 15% of their monthly rent is ultimately going to go to some big expense every year. So as a rule of thumb, you could just say 10% of your monthly rent is going to go to repairs, which is another $190 a month on a $1,900 a month rental. So next is going to be what people refer to as the CapEx cost. So this is factoring in for costs that may only occur every 15, 20, or even 30 years. So these are big ticket items like a new roof, which may last you 30 years, or hot water heater, which may last you 15 years, or an HVAC unit, which may last you 10 years. You want to take out a little bit of every monthly rental check that you receive and just mentally allocate that to these bigger expenses that occur every couple of years. So people generally factor in 5 to 15% of their monthly rent that'll go towards the CapEx cost. And so the truth is that for many people own rental properties, after you factor in 10% of the monthly rent that was going to go towards property management fees, another 10% goes towards maintenance fees, another 8% towards vacancy rate, and another 10% towards CapEx costs, what they're left with is going to be lower than what their monthly mortgage payment is. This means that they are not cash flow positive. They're not actually making a profit every month. So just make sure that you factor in all these additional costs before you buy your first rental property. So the next mistake is buying too far away from your primary residence, from where you live. There's a lot of hype right now about investing in out-of-state real estate, but I'm gonna tell you that's not really advisable if it's your very first rental property. You wanna be pretty hands-on with your first rental property and make sure that you don't make any other silly mistakes, and you wanna be pretty involved. And let's say that you wanna manage the property yourself, or you at least wanna manage some renovations at the property between tenants. But if that property is 2, 3, 4 hours away from you, the truth is you're just not going to be as hands-on or as involved in that rental property as you would if it is only 20, 30 minutes away from you. And yes, you could just hire a property manager to manage this property for you, but the truth is that property manager is not going to care about your rental property nearly as much as you do. Another factor is going to be understanding the market. If you're looking on Zillow at a property's 2, 3 hours away, you may see a home and be like, wow, that is an unbelievable deal. I can't believe I can buy that house at that price. But but that's because you're comparing it to your local market. You don't understand that market nearly as much. And you may actually end up overpaying for that property or overestimating what you can actually get in rent for that unit. And that's why I recommend that you invest in the real estate market that you already understand the best. So as an example, if your next door neighbor put his home up on the market, you could instantly recognize if that home is listed way below market value or if they way overpriced their home. And this is because you understand your local real estate market. So when you're buying your first rental property, I recommend buying in your local market and try to keep it within an hour drive of your home. So the next mistake is not screening your tenants well enough. You don't want to find a tenant from your apartment from a friend of a friend who knows somebody's looking for an apartment. You want to be very thorough and methodical in screening potential tenants. You can do everything right when buying a rental property, but having a bad tenant in there can turn it into a complete nightmare and financially cripple you. This is why you really want to take your time in screening your tenants and trying to increase your rental rates so that you also increase the quality of tenants that you're getting. And this is actually why I'm a fan of listing your rental unit with a real estate agent. By listing with a real estate agent, it'll get listed in your state's multiple listing service, which is going to distribute it out to all the public websites as well as all the real estate agents working with renters. So this is going to get your rental unit as much exposure as it possibly can, which is going to get you as many applications to choose from as you can. Now, listing your rental with a real estate agent will cost you, it's usually about 1 month's rent, but it's going to be well worth it. Now, you also want to charge an application fee for anybody who's applying to your rental. And this application fee is actually going to go towards a credit check and a criminal history check on your potential tenants. And just having this $30 to $50 application fee is automatically going to screen out a lot of potential tenants that you probably didn't want in the first place. And in an ideal situation, if you get enough exposure for your rental unit, you may have 3 or 4 different applicants that you can read through the reports and choose from. And if you want to learn how I made over $100,000 profit with my first ever live-in flip, check out my video right here breaking that down for you. Don't forget to hit that red subscribe button for more real estate and financial advice. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you over in the next video.